Welcome to all the participants for joining in this second meeting of Young Mind conference. This conference is our way to give a platform to all the researchers of the economics who are joining the field as completing their PhD program or post-PhD program. So in this endeavor, this is the second part of the series, and this part we have done some exciting changes also. We have multiple plenary talk, panel discussion, and other things. So today is the inauguration. I am going to invite Professor KN to introduce Professor Shailaja, who will be giving the keynote address. Okay, so Professor KN, the stage is all yours.
Students are introducing her, no? Students will introduce her. But, yeah. Yeah. Good evening. Thank you, Professor Tara Shankar Shah, the person who just welcomed all of you. He is the convener of the conference, who has been sending all the emails to all of you. Okay, so if you have not met him, he is Professor Tara Shankar Shah. Okay, and he has a team of people. Some are here. Professor Aditi is here. Professor Radif, let them know. Yeah. Aditi, Radif, Pintu, Shovik, they're all here. Professor Pintu Parvai. Some of the colleagues. Okay, it gives me immense pleasure on behalf of the institute, because the director is unable to come. He's requested me to convey his welcome to all of you, and to welcome you all to that. Professor Shailaja Fennel, Ms. Sunanda Nayabitkar, all the team from INET. Professor Partha Mukhopadhyay is also with us today, one of the panelists for tomorrow, and other colleagues and young scholars. So I thought I'll use this opportunity to briefly introduce the Department of Economics to many of you who may not have had the opportunity to look at us in the website. But this just to draw your attention to the department. So this is where I thought I'll begin with. So about the department and all that, basically I just wanted to say, all of you know that economics as a discipline has grown over a period of time. And then it is also, the profile of the department has also undergone a lot of change over the years. And the discipline has gained a lot of potential, has a lot of potential, and also gained a lot of importance in IIT Bombay as well as in other institutions. In IIT Bombay, especially among all the engineering and sciences discipline, economics has also really come up with a big thing. So our objective is to be in sync with the world in terms of the subject as well as in terms of the departments. So we launched an undergraduate program called BS Bachelor of Science in Economics in 2017. 4 batches have passed out. I'll give you some brief about that. And then we became a separate department only in 2023. That is on 16 January 2023. We are still an infant department, only 2 years old. Okay, I'll tell you what all we have done in the last 2 years. Okay, now we were part of it since inception under the Humanities and Social Sciences Department. And we have made significant contribution over the years, from 9 to 14 faculty in 6 years. Well, I must say that when I joined, I was only the 4th faculty member in economics in the Humanities Social Sciences. Now we have 14 people in economics, a separate department. So we have 14, and the best part of it is also the strength of the PhD students, which is about 54 currently active students, 2 of whom defended the thesis today. Okay, so from in terms of where we stand in IIT Bombay, you might have seen this news item in Times of India, published in September, that students have said 4th preferred option. So you all know that the toppers in JEE Advanced join IIT Bombay, and this is the 4th preferred option. We have overtaken all the sciences and several engineering branches. at par with chemical. And we also have minor and honors program in economics, so our students can do a minor elsewhere. Same way, students of engineering discipline, science discipline can also do a minor in economics. So a basket of 5 courses they have to do, so which is over and above the core course that we teach to our own BS economics students. So we are also part of the institute in improving the global presence. So students do 264 credits and all that you can see, minor, and also interdisciplinary program that we are moving towards. Our students are also doing interdisciplinary program in other branches, including computer science, artificial intelligence, and industrial engineering, operation research, management, digital health, and whatnot. Now, we have admitting over the years, we have grown in terms of the undergraduate admissions. We have up to reached about 40 now over the years, starting with 29. And now we said we will sort of cap it around 50 over a period of time, so that we have good batch strength to interact in that. And our strength also, which has been historical, the PhD program in economics over several years. So we have currently, as I said, 70% are girls. So we are not doing any special recruitment here, but most of them prefer to join our department. And where do they go after they graduate? You can see the list of institutions where they've joined. The list is only partial, very, just to give you an idea. Much more, list is much longer than this. Several IITs and IIMs where our own alumni are now faculty members, and also some in the consulting companies and Niti Aayog and whatnot. Okay, and we admit about 8 to 10 PhD students twice a year, July and December put together, and about 8 of them graduate every year. And we get, all of them will get scholarship paid by the Ministry of Education. And we have also guided 5 PhD postdocs in the last couple of years, and all of them are well placed as well. So they also occupy positions in other IITs. So we have 14 faculty members. This is a list. You can look at the website for more details. I'm Krishnan Narayanan, currently heading the Department of Economics here. Okay, now the faculty has been extremely active in the last 4 years. You can see the number of publications that we have achieved. In journals, 84 working papers, book chapters, and books published by us. We also, some example snapshot of the journals where we are published is also given here. You have all that details in the website as well. Okay, only in the last 3 years I have given a select list here. Okay, now we have a couple of books also published in the last couple of years, and there are also now. So I must say that the book that I wrote jointly with Purnima has become a textbook for a course in IIM Ranchi only from this January. Okay, on regional economic diversity. Partha Mukhopadhyay would remember, is one of the reviewers of the book in that. Okay. Now, the number of workshops and conferences we organize, as Tara said, this is the second in the series of INET. So we started with the Asian meeting of the Econometrics Society in 2023. And then we started all the workshop on economic theory with Professor Basu as the lead speaker. And we had Pathways to Sustainable Economy, Banking and Finance Perspective, 16th Annual Conference of the National Knowledge Forum, and Behavioral Research in Economics workshop, and first meeting we conducted last year, February. This is only the earlier. Now, we have received a lot of funding from alumni of IIT Bombay. Up to 3 distinguished alumni have been very generous to us. And we have a new building which we are yet to occupy. We waited for the conference to get over to move in the next month or so. It's called A91 Eco Hub, because the name of the company that the donor has is called A91 Partners. Okay, that he has suggested the name. So idea is to build state-of-the-art econometrics lab for BS and PhD students. We already have. We'll build it much better. And right now we also conducted a workshop on econometric valuation of projects and programs, and webinars on international. So we had several people who have been giving webinars as well as coming in person in that. Okay. Now, Professor Basu is among the distinguished visiting professors of the department. N.R. Kamath Chair, he has been from 2023 to 25. Okay. Now, the aim of the department, I'm saying all this with a particular purpose, especially targeting the budding scholars, to be among the leading economics department under schools in the country within the next 3 to 5 years. In QS ranking, among the IITs, we are #1 in economics and econometrics. And to provide the most rigorous, comprehensive, analytical, rich training to the UG students as well as in the 4-year program. And of course, the first 4 batches are well placed in top international consulting and finance companies, government organizations like RBI, Niti Aayog, etc. After 4-year BS economics, they are able to compete with the master students of the country to crack the RBI officers exam. The most recent declared result last week also had a BS economics student getting qualified in that. And of course, as we proceed, we plan to launch a master's program in economics, an integrated master's to PhD, and we also are planning to launch, IITB is very popular nomenclature in IIT Bombay called interdisciplinary dual degree program, and that way they want to have it in economics, where somebody in computer science or electrical engineering will spend 1 more year on BTech in electrical or computer science and earn a master's in economics. That's what we had. And focus is to strengthen the analytical reasoning with deep-rooted theoretical understanding of applied courses to meet increasingly huge requirements, etc. We are also introducing research and academic tie-ups with the Department of Economics and several top national and international universities and the corporate houses to expand our activity so that we benefit. So we have semester exchange program for BS economics students, collaborative research interface, visiting researcher faculty portion as well. Some of the above are discussed in international universities. Many students plan semester exchange for 1 semester at least. They go to a number of institutions around the world. So it's basically saying that as we move forward, some of the examples of where our students got placed, the undergraduate students, it's given here over the last 4 years. You can see, name the top companies in India and overseas, they're there. Our BS economics alumni here. And higher education also, they have joined a number of these institutions for masters or PhD program. The last year's topper has got directly admission into PhD in economics at Cornell. Okay, we also have a student who has excelled as an entrepreneur. He's a very big shot in the LinkedIn and others. He has so many top 10 out of the 11,000 plus startups in Asia. So he's an undergraduate student who did BS economics here. So the idea here is to basically to sum up, that's what we have been doing all these years. And the reason why I'm sharing with all of you is because we are hiring. Okay, and this is the most fertile ground my colleagues feel, so they said I should basically be sharing this with all of you to motivate you. And then the eligibility, etc. is given in the website, which you can look at. Feel free to interact with any of us who are here. Now we are also now joined by Professor Surajit Bhattacharya and Professor Shavik Banerjee among the faculty members here. Others have already been introduced here. Okay, now I take this opportunity to welcome you all to the second meeting of young minds, as Sonanda and Tara have coined it. They said INET starts with this, but then basically we are saying that it has been an excellent collaboration between IIT Bombay and INET. We launched the first INET in 2024 February, exactly a year earlier, and now we are coming to the second INET. So the details of this INET, I leave it to Sunanda to explain. And but feel good factor for all of you is you are few among the several submissions that we received. The details, I leave it to you to explain. Okay, so you are really fortunate. It must be the best in terms of, because there's a big team that has gone through your papers to shortlist and invite you here. So the success of the first conference gave us the confidence to go for the second one. And we hope this relationship will continue between INET and IIT Bombay, Department of Economics. And also I would like to say that the teacher in me comes out. Please do not miss any of the plenary talks or the panel discussions. It is a great difficulty that amidst all the busy schedule, we have been able to put together 2 interesting panel discussions tomorrow, one academic panel, other one is the industry panel. And we have 3 big speakers lined up for you. We're going to start with Professor Shailaja Fennell today evening for the keynote address. Thank you, Professor Fennell, for flying all the way from Cambridge to spare this couple of days with us. She'll be here till 19 for you to interact. We have panel discussions tomorrow, and also a plenary session by Dr. Jyotsna Puri on 19th at 12 noon, followed by a valedictory address by Dr. Savinan Chakravarti, Chief Economist and Managing Director of Citibank, India. That's where it's there. I'm sure you will have very fruitful stay in our campus. Just be aware, don't walk in the darkness, because yesterday couple of leopards were sighted on the in the darker area. So they are scared only of light and sound. Therefore, after darkness, don't walk behind the in the guest house area, etc. Because the more other areas. That's what the director said that we should caution. Huh?
Playing loud music on our phone.
If you want to walk, but better to avoid. Yeah, that's exactly. Maybe the light. But my colleagues have put together a lot of efforts to make this happen. Excellent teamwork between INET and Department of Economics, IIT Bombay here. So my student volunteers have done excellent job. They've been working relentlessly, corresponding with you, making sure all the arrangements are done, and making sure that you're brought safely here and you stay is comfortable. And I'm sure, I think Saptashi is still busy with the menu. So he's arranging all the refreshments and food here, another colleague. So all of us have swung into action in making this happen. So enjoy your stay here. As our director usually say, enjoy the tranquility of the campus as well, because we have a beautiful campus which has been preserved all these years. So again, welcome you all to IIT Bombay and specifically to this particular second meeting of the young minds in the frontiers of economics that INET and IIT Bombay have put together. Thank you very much. Thanks. May I now invite Ms. Sunanda to, you'll use this mic.
Thank you, sir. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Sunanda Nair-Bitkar, and I'm the Director, South Asia, for the Institute for New Economic Thinking, INET. So, on behalf of Dr. Robert Johnson, the President of INET, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you all to this second Meeting of Young Minds, MYM, in Frontiers of Economics conference, which is jointly organized by the Department of Economics here as well, and the Institute, as well as the Institute's Young Scholars Initiative called YSI. So the Institute for New Economic Thinking, I don't know if, I don't have slides, but I don't know how many of you know about INET, but the Institute is a New York City-based non-profit, non-partisan organization, which was founded in response to the financial crisis of 2008. The core idea was that society confronts a myriad of monumental problems, and economics must understand and address these challenges. So to better serve society, economics must work collaboratively to deeply understand the maladies that are fomenting despair around the world. So the mission of the Institute is to courageously embrace the challenge and provide pathways to realize needed change. So as such, the Institute supports economic thinking that is free of intellectual barriers and plutocratic coercion that resonates with reality and serves the global society. Its community ranges from students and young researchers to Nobel laureates. The Institute encourages an open global dialogue and foments critical discourse and welcomes all points of view. INET also supports a dynamic global network of nearly 24,000 young economic thinkers, young scholars, and hosts convenings that bring together scholars, policymakers, and academics from around the world. It cultivates a body of research, builds a community of economic leadership of the future through its YSI, and nurtures these goals with a vigorous and technologically sophisticated strategy of dissemination to create maximum impact. So the Institute is building international communities of new economic thinkers, amplifying new economic ideas to a growing audience, and creating strategic initiatives and partnerships with leading institutions in North and South America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. So these partnerships are integral to the creation of new ideas and the development of a worldwide community of new economic thinkers. We've created convenings both virtual and in person around the world. INET uses its convening power to bring together leading economic thinkers to discuss issues and develop new multidisciplinary ways of looking at the global economy. Regardless of generation or geography, INET aspires to create an economics for humankind. After all, we are all in this together. So this conference is one of the many convenings we organize throughout the world, building cohorts of young thinkers. Here we are building the MYM, or the Meeting of Young Minds Scholars. And it's here that I want to take this opportunity to congratulate each one of you scholars. The final 53 scholars were chosen after an extremely selective process of review from over 300 applications that we received. The MYM in the last year, which was our inaugural MYM, was the first cohort of 50 scholars that we had. So you could consider yourself having been selected through a very, very rigorous process. It was blind review in the beginning, and then we moved forward, and it's actually really commendable that the 53 of you are here. In conclusion, I want to just thank Professor Shailaja Fennell for kindly being here to open the conference, to Professor Devang Khakkar and Professor Subhashish Chaudhary, who supported this initiative from the very beginning. They were the directors of IIT Bombay when we first pitched the idea. To Professor K. Narayanan and the entire IIT Bombay team of Dr. Tara Shankar Shah, Dr. Aditi Chobal, Dr. Shavik Banerjee, Dr. Saptarishi Ghosh, Dr. Radif Chundakan, and Dr. Pintu Pasoi, the fully volunteer INET YSI team of Dr. Arun Balachandran, Dr. Satvik Debiswas, and Mr. Bikram Barman. To my colleagues, Jay Pocklington, Heske Van Dornen, and Christina Mosalage, who were not able to fly to India at this time, but who have worked with me as we visualized this conference a few years ago. And an especially big thank you to our young scholars who have traveled from far to be here to present their work. The many senior academics who have generously given their time to this conference, I'm truly grateful to all of you. I'm sure this would be a fantastic conference, and I am looking forward to the 3 days. To you, Shailaja. Thanks.
We introduce Professor Shailaja Fennell. I will give you a brief story about her and about this entire, how we have designed the program. So last year when we were designing this entire conference, our idea was that this conference should be a futuring exercise, how we are going to see this economics is going to evolve in future. And this year, there are a lot of changes across the world, and I thought that why don't we look at how the paradigm of economics is going to change in contextual world. So when we pitched this idea, we went ahead with it, and when we approached Professor Shailaja Fennell, she was very excited about it, and the one thing she did was that she asked me all the papers that we have selected for this conference. And she has meticulously read most of them and included all of yours in her talk. So it is up to you to listen to her talk and to find out where are you figuring out. So that is the hard work Professor Fennell has done. So it will be my audacity to tell her scholarship, because where she is coming from and what they have done is good enough, and whatever you will see, get it from the internet. So I am not going to repeat it. But just I will say that Professor Shailaja Fennell works in the Department of Land and Economy, and her research interest is mostly in economic security, ecological change, community and national resilience. Her work is in the area of Africa, Asia, and throughout the world, and this will be also reflected in her presentation today. So without taking the time off, and coming between you and Professor Fennell, I will just invite her to come, and please give a, yeah, please.
Whatever is convenient. I'm happy to use that or this or. Okay. Problem with not having pockets in a salwar kameez, I've got to hold it, but that's okay. We'll manage. Okay, it's okay. I wasn't wearing trousers today, but that's all right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Narayanan, to invite me again to IIT Bombay. It feels like a second home now. Thank you, Sananda, for seamlessly organizing and getting me here. And thank you, Sarah, for answering my emails at all times of day and night whenever I asked any questions. I also am very excited, and I was saying this to Partha, we were having tea before. What makes it exciting is to have the young minds, the next generation. And I'm going to say maybe the next to next generation, since some of us have been around teaching economics for longer than that. But absolutely, I asked Tara for the abstracts and wanted to read the papers because we want to know where you're going, partly because we want to be there for the ride for the next 10 years at least, or as long as we can do research. But also because it's really exciting to go back and to see how the discipline of economics has changed. And so Tara didn't say that. Initially, I had a rather long and winding title, and then Narayan said, shorten it. And I thought, shorten it and take it forward. So I'm going to talk about wicked problems and new pathways for economic analysis. I'll just wait until people settle. No, not at all. And the reason I'm going to talk about this is, in a way, it explains why linear journeys are not necessarily the most effective ones. We often do linear work. I mean, it's important to understand that. But when you step back, particularly in what you call a pathology of analysis, why did that paper not get completed? Why was that variable wrong? Why was that t-test insignificant? Sometimes it's not because you did it wrong, but we have to reconsider how we state the problem. Stating the problem, and it can take the whole first year of a PhD, right? You keep rewriting your research question. Just try not to rewrite your research question after you've done your regressions. You try and do it in the first year. But the point is, some of that is inevitable, because the way in which we saw causality when we were students had to do with what are the statistical techniques. We have come so far. We have a plethora of statistical techniques. But that is not sufficient. New data generation is not sufficient because the world is full of problems that are still persistent. Someone asked me, how come you're a development economist? It's been 70 years and there's no development. I said, if it was easy, we wouldn't need a discipline to do it. So I'm going to take you to 3 sets of areas. I'm going to look at climate change. A lot of the papers were around that issue. I'm going to talk about agriculture, particularly the challenges of biodiversity / genetic modification, and then I'm going to visit how you put them together, and in each case I will provide some pictures because it's 6 o'clock in the evening, you don't want to hear me just put up words, and I'm going to ask us to go through that. So here goes. I have 40 minutes, is that right? Okay. So I'm going to take us back, in a sense. The wicked problem exists in social science from the 1970s. So just because we have to have some references, otherwise it's more plagiarism, right? So Rittel and Weber, 73, is the starting point for the story. And what's interesting in Rittel and Weber is they are social scientists. And I know there's a difference between humanities and social science and economists, but what is particularly interesting about this is that we all share that social world. Irrespective of whether we're lawyers or others, we share that world. And we try and simplify it. And that is the classic scientific temper, because when you simplify something, the variables are less and you can run a regression. But we know it's correlation, not causality. However, as far back as 73 in social policy, particularly in the making of public policy, it became clear that social problems are not always amenable to what's called taming. They can't be domesticated. Some of those still need to be unpicked. That work has re-emerged by the time we come to the beginning of the 21st century. The idea is you can't solve. Not because you're not capable, you don't have the data and you don't know the techniques. It's because a lot of what's happening in the social world is not about a single solution. It's about shared value and meaning. It's about everybody agreeing that that is the one solution. If you start with this is the one solution, you might have people very extremely opposed to you. And therefore, however good that one solution is, it doesn't become a real world solution. Now, for those of us who work in economic theory, that's fine. But many of you are working in applications and thinking about policy. And so something that we have learned in economics, and we've got much better in it as a discipline, is thinking about framing. What is the context within which you are setting up your research? And so the first one I want to go to is one of the oldest problems. It's older than economics. It's called poverty. And I look back to when we studied the literature, so there are poor people and non-poor people. And somehow, the poverty of poor people was their fault. That's called Victorian England. That's the country in which I live and research. But, you know, they are the cause. They don't have enough income, and we look at budget sets, and we look at allocation. But if, move away from that paternalistic Victorian view, but if you think poverty is only a lack of income, then you'll think about targeting to make people less poor. That's good. But if poverty is a structural feature, for example, a lack of resources in the community, you'll keep having to target. Unless you can create social networks by which people can move into a more agentic entrepreneurial position. So we have many social programs. In the UK, we have this problem. We don't have a growing economy. A lot of our social services, including the Jewel, the National Health Service, is crushed by the demands of that system. So we need to fix even those things that we thought we had fixed in the 1950s. Actually, the conceptual aspect of it's much more interesting. The conceptual aspect is when we enunciate a research problem, it can be a technical problem. Those are the coolest ones. You write your paper, you get a neat result, it gets published, fab. You got your journal paper, you get your first job. Great. And we need to do those things. However, the reason they're called tame problems is not because they're easy to compute, but when you start your problem, you get your data, you know where to go. They're straightforward. That's what I call the linear problems. However, there are others, and this is always what your research supervisor will say, don't do this, but I did it, so I know. Don't research something where you don't know what the concept or the research question is. You know there's a problem. Right? So there isn't a solution. You've got to first collect data and then figure out what the data says and then theorize. That's a harder route, but sometimes it can be very exciting. But as the DeFrays and Nagendra paper says, and I think it's a really nice read, and it's only 6 pages because it's in science, they say the most challenging problems, or what I'm going to call wicked problems, are the type 3 problems. The type 3 problems neither have clear-cut definitions. So you can't say, oh, I know what I want to research, I'll go look for the data, and then I'll tell you what the theory is. They also don't have technical solutions. In fact, the common feature about a type 3 problem is they are continually iterative with a learning component. Think embodied growth or endogenous growth, mix the two together, that's tough. But that is the nature of what's happening. And so the way to move to solutions is an adaptive process, which does mean that we're looking at a more difficult constituted world and consequently a different way. Rather than turning into philosophy, in which I wasn't trained, I'm going to give us 3 examples to think through this in the latter part of my discussion. But what I want to say, and it seems a little bit presumptuous to say that as an Institute of Technology, but dare I say, science and technology, while associated with knowledge, are not adequate to address social science problems. They are fabulous in giving us tools. But if you simplify, if you reduce the real world component to the point that it's a true false selection, or however difficult optimality is, doesn't return to the real world, that's why so many economists don't get rich. We talk about theories that don't work in the real world. And so if you think about tame problems, they're interesting, but they do not go beyond identifying, obtaining missing information. So you can plug a market gap. You can do something really clever there. When you have social problems, they're about what is good decision making. That is not about the one truth. It's what do you think about the truth? Now, we have one element in economics that does that and does that well. That's behavioral economics. We try and do things like nudge to see how people change their behavior. But wicked problems have another aspect. Why do people think different things? Because they hold different values. That's a consequence of their own context, right? So indigenous people in Australia have a very different meaning for land. They see it as part of themselves. They see it as living thing. Whereas if you think of an agricultural farmer with thousands of acres of land in Australia, they're thinking input-output model. They're both real, but you're not going to find a way to get them to agree unless you do a very complex exercise. Wicked problems are also not just complex, but they have interdependent parts. And I'll show you what that means when you think about, in management, you think, how do you get a company to move forward? It can be market supremacy, it can be profit maximization, it can be new tech. You can't do them all in 1 year. In that sense, we have to prioritize. Another way of thinking about it is bring people together. So, what I'm going to argue, and give you the examples going forward now, is that if we think about what was wrong with our policy making before, it wasn't that people were not clever. There were plenty of clever people around. But we went, and this is global, this is not any country in particular, economic policy and even development thinking, which is a subfield in which I work a lot, we go for the expert-driven technical solution. But it's top-down. We tell people what should be done. Why is that problematic? Because, well, we know, and I can't say this in Mulpatu sitting here, but I'm going to say it anyway. In urban communities, we haven't solved the problem, and we have data for urban communities. We still can't solve, whether you're sitting in the US or anywhere else, unemployment. INET, 2008, the Occupy movement, 40% of Southern Europe, Spain and Portugal, young, educated, college-leaving students without a job. So we still have fundamental problems despite the expert knowledge. We also know, particularly with wicked problems, because it's difficult to define, if you force fit a template, you're actually not seeing the problem. You're just seeing the contours of your template. And when I say this, people go, but why? Why can't models that work in Europe work in Asia? And the answer is, because the economy in Asia is not like the economy in Europe. If I take the Occupy movement answer, which is get people into full employment, does that mean in the formal sector or the informal sector? What does that mean for the entire part of the world called the Global South? Most people have non-standard jobs. Standard job being 9 to 5 with a pension at a factory. In fact, even the Global North doesn't have factories anymore. So the point I'm making is a wicked problem is fascinating, but it can't be solved like a tame problem from an engineering solution. It's not about fix the missing part or redraw the missing part. We've made advances in the early 2000s with evidence-based policy. That was a major shift. The World Bank, lots of people, the work of Nobel laureates, Banerjee and Flow, trying to think about it. We have got a lot better in generating evidence. And it could be seen, a number of authors in the wicked problem terrain say, it could temper the wickedness problem. Certainly getting more data, better data, sharper data, particularly the control and treatment group is good. But will it lead to consensus? And the answer they've all come to till 2024 is the collection and transmission cannot preempt the dimensionality problem. You can get better at showing what the data says, but you still have to conceptualize. Okay, so to end off that bit, before I move to the 3 examples, let me start with the DeFries and again the paper, which does something very interesting. It says, how do you know if a problem is tame or wicked? How do you know which way to go? And they're going, technical solution might work if you can monitor the outcome, right? You got a solution, you get the data. If your data says, it's not relating to the problem, maybe it's not a tame problem. Maybe poverty targeted to a group 40 years on hasn't changed. You're reducing their poverty, hasn't changed their behavior. Something else needs to come into place. And so the argument would be, what could be the reasons this is actually a wicked problem rather than a tame problem? Where do you locate that? And the answer to that is data collection, yes. But once you collect the data and monitor, you need to re-evaluate the model. So this, of course, De Vries and Nagendra are doing the Ostrom argument. They're saying Eleanor Ostrom, what she said, is the reason she gets the Nobel Prize, not the economist. She's an economist, but not the conventional economist. This allows the problem of a false positive. I think that's something we all understand from the statistical side. It's a really neat way of putting it. Okay, so first of my three is climate change, obviously. It is today's most prominent wicked problem. Because the evidence is all there. I don't think anybody, except Trump maybe, I don't think most people would say 1.5 degrees has not been surpassed. Okay. I don't think anyone would say, including those who are naysayers, that sea levels haven't risen. You may disagree about the cause, but those facts are irrefutable. Everybody agrees. The scientific community is pushing, saying it's human activity, we need net zero, we need mitigation. Not everybody buys that. That's the problem. The data is there. Despite near agreements, not only with climate experts and other scientists, on the facts, the causality is disputed. Here you have the first powerful element of what is a wicked problem. Why do they have different views? Because you can make the argument about the average temperature rising and requiring change, but is it human? Should it be about cows because they give out GHGs? Should it be about nations and industrial policy? Should it be about you and me putting down reducing air conditioner use? It is so many multiple linkages that this problem cannot be resolved with the full information base. So most scientists in the climate change space are now reconsidering, particularly because every COP, dare I say, is almost a tamasha. Lots of people go, lots of clever people go. We don't get very far in signing the agreement to the next level. Why? Well, there's an economist to tell us some of the answers. Stiglitz wrote this collected, it's a short collection of arguments, and it came out after the Dubai conference, so quite recent in terms of our thinking. And he said, the problem is economists want to convert climate change into a tame problem. So what do? They go, we've got a solution. It's called a carbon price. Now, for those of us who were trained in the 80s, we heard this before. It didn't work then. Can you please tell us how this carbon price calculation is different from that one? I can't see it in the mix as yet. Stiglitz makes the argument, because economists want a single solution, they go, this is the solution. The reality is, it might be part of a portfolio of carbon policies. But we are no further from creating a carbon market now than we were in the 1990s. I shouldn't be saying this is Narayanan's work, but it is so interesting. We not only say it's a single solution, we say it's a first best. You can't have a first best when you don't have a market. Why can't you have a first best for a carbon market? Because it's linked to the idea of net zero. When we don't know how net zero is composed of mitigation and adaptation, I'll say a little bit more with an example. How are we so sure? We are not. This is posturing. And I don't mean it in a negative way, but this is how scientists are also perceived with their 1.5 and the sea level changes going. That's true, but how do we know the cause? In this case, why should we create this market? What is the evidence? And so the wicked problem in climate change requires us to reconsider not just the way we think, but the way we present our models and possibly rework the way we even design those models. Okay. And here's just an example. This is not from academic thinking. This is from the policy world. This is actually practitioners. International Institute of Environment and Development, probably leading NGOs looking at this issue because they bring practitioners from across the world to work with scientists. And I think this is classic. I mean, the Paris Agreement, 2030 is like tomorrow, right? Maybe the day after tomorrow maybe. But the adaptation action strategy came in only at this point. Up to that point was all mitigation. And even in the adaptation strategy, which is what most developing countries would maximally be able to do, because you can't mitigate if you are a poor economy. There's no way, because you haven't even industrialized. How are you going to mitigate? And so if we think about the adaptation story, everyone has to produce a national strategy for adaptation, an NAP. That has to be approved. It has to work through the threshold. But it also requires the rich countries to cough up the money. Neither has the money been coughed up. We know this everywhere. Loss and damage took till this year to be approved, and even then, only a small part of the entire amount that's required. And this is without even historical remediation, thinking about that aspect. And so countries are being required to be on track for something of their adaptation activities without knowing what money they're going to get. But I'm going to tell you something which is far worse. This push has already created maladaptation, which means loss of lives in terms of loss of jobs. We already had an employment problem. So I'm going to give you my first case study. We're in South Asia. These are all facts you know. But the fact is big. Much of South Asia is an informal sector with rural or urban. We're going to have climatically stressful, which means above 35 degrees where your wet bulb is way too hot. 250 days out of 365. That is a horrific number. Okay? So we already know this is happening. We know the greatest ice cap outside the Arctic Antarctic, which is the HKH, the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, is going to become unsurvivable if this happens. This is Sri Lanka. I want to talk about Sri Lanka. This is Chambers, Robert Chambers, who's one of the people who's got participation. The reason is, I'm going to use an example of water in Sri Lanka. You think, why water Sri Lanka? It's not got a problem. The problem is in the Indian subcontinent. No, there's problems with water in every country. And the reason there's a problem is mismanagement. This goes back to the public policy problem. We have a mismanagement of water resources because we administer for people. People don't administer their own water supply. We fail to see opportunities because it's the agents and the brokers of development who are doing it rather than the communities. And what Chambers said is, and this is old, this is when he was working at the World Bank talking about participation and poverty reduction. This is picked out of those documents. He said, we fail to see that water and managing resources is part of human management. It's not managing for the humans, it's the humans who manage it. What does it mean in Sri Lanka? This is Sri Lanka's agroecological maps. The pinker and the redder it is, the drier it is. The highlands, the purple and the blue is where the water is. It also, of course, is overlaid by where the war was and the way in which peoples live. Okay? Affirmation, I hope. Now, in Sri Lanka, what they did, and this is completed, this is a project that we're very proud of with the UNDP. They recreated beautiful irrigation systems in one part, saying, this is how it used to look. But this has become like an eco-park. This is beautiful, but it's not what the farmers work. And what did the poverty report narrative compare? So Sri Lankan board said the impact is nonetheless, the CBOs who evaluated this said, there's still drought in the rest of the country. This is beautiful, but the wicked problem hasn't been solved. You've created a prototype, not helpful. The heat is going up. There's more difficulty. People are fighting because now they want to be like that ancient irrigation system. You haven't provided them the resources. You can't tell people, here it is, we're not going to give you resources. And so they're saying there's going to be not just a water crisis, but a conflict between those groups who have been part of the process and those who haven't. And so UMI, the International Water Management Institute in 2024 said, actually this is a really bad idea of maladaptation. What you've got is 81% living in rural areas who want to do agriculture, not part of the irrigation system. The dry zones, we won't mention conflict, but the dry zones have conflict and they have no ability to grow food. And so their argument is the government's doing a great job with this idea of new infrastructure. But don't make a tame problem out of something that's a wicked problem. And I want to introduce Chandni Singh's excellent work. I mean, we should be proud of the next generation of scholars who are doing this. The argument is the way forward is to use a process frame to then get a normative frame. Don't start with the normative frame, start with the process frame. So that's my first example. I'm hoping to, from this, help you to unpick with me why recognizing the wicked problem rather than reframing it as a tame problem might be helpful for us in the frontiers of economic analysis. That wasn't so good, sorry. Okay, so my second example. Again, established as a wicked problem in another part of the world, the case of GMO. Again, we're going back to, so this is high-yielding varieties, phase 2, right? Everyone HYV, but this is phase 2. So it's not a new thing. Genetic modification goes back to the Green Revolution. But it's a different thing, because this is moving genetic material from one species to another species. That's still genetics. The material on GMO is fully available across the global north. The problem has never been defined. What is the controversy in GMO? I've stated the facts. It's genetic modification one to the other. Information in two parts of the world, very different. Is the problem the health hazard, which is what the European Union talks about? Is it about other species, non-human species? What happens to them? Is it about trade issues, because you're trading in different kinds of, effectively, product, if you think GM is different. In the US, genetic modification is abundant. It's labeled, but that's not enforced, so people don't bother. In Europe, very strict regulation, they don't want it. This has created a big, wicked problem in agriculture. India is one of the countries that's facing that. Should we have it, should we not? We have all the information, but without resolving the problem of the definition, we are not going to move further. And this is something that we encountered in our work when we did this project for 5 years, the Tigris project, transforming India for the next green revolution, 20th century, because we encountered millets as an alternative. To discuss this, I want to think about agriculture in a different way. Why is agriculture simply about one or the other, when I said earlier on in my slides, why not think about it as a portfolio? Stiglitz says this for carbon markets. Let's look at the same thing about biodiversity. GM is fundamentally an argument about those who are pro and against biodiversity. It is not a trade argument. Let's get that out there. And again, moving forward in thinking about agriculture with biodiversity, we can go to another interesting piece that collected an incredible number of economists' work in thinking about natural capital. The Dasgupta review, which probably didn't get enough exposure because it came out in the middle of a pandemic, but the collection of economic scientific thinking argues clearly that biodiversity is a form of portfolio management. That's music to our ears, because we like portfolio management, right? It makes sense. Select a portfolio. Maximize your returns. Obviously, a more developed country has a capital portfolio that produces more goods. So maladaptation is going to happen more likely in a poorer country. There's a link between those two things. The task of any asset manager, it can be Boston Consulting Group, it can be anyone who's doing it, is to maximize the portfolio. But here, what we're saying is inclusive wealth of the social value of the economy needs to be taken into account. People value things differently. So we've got the prototype of what we need to do. But we still have the challenge of biodiversity loss. So when you've got biodiversity loss anywhere in the world, when do we know that species is important? After it goes extinct. If poor countries have a greater difficulty in portfolio management, they need more resources rather than becoming the sink for the rich countries to manage biodiversity for their benefit. So beginning to see how a wicked problem might help you address what you're going to value, what you're going to look for in terms of financial return, where you want to be pricing. And this is where the two things come together. Climate change requires us to choose new crops. We don't understand GM, we're in difficulty because a whole bunch of new crops that we haven't thought about, which are going to come into place. There, I've got your global emissions. Sorry, that doesn't want to do anything, but I've got global emissions. You can see, here's my wicked problem. Is emissions livestock you're going to go for? Crop production you're going to go for? Land use? They're all in the order of 20-odd%. You can't do them all. Which one are you going to go for? Countries do different things. Now look at figures 2 and 3.2. Figure 2 is telling you about crop and livestock across the world. And that's why that big red thing matters a lot. Enteric fermentation, that's cows farting methane. That's what it means, right? So again, think, what should we be doing? And can I please ask you to think about that in relation to the bottom, multicolored, completely, you know, I don't know, Jackson Pollock kind of picture, but why it's there, it's saying, and this is OECD FAO, that if we look at the world, we've already lost biodiversity, and we're only producing 3 crops. 78% of all the cereal we eat is rice, wheat, and maize. So we've already lost biodiversity globally. So in that context, Narayan and myself, a whole bunch of people, both in India, in the UK, and in 2 African countries, we were looking at millets. And it so happened the Millets Mission was created. By the time we finished our projects, everyone was talking about millets, not because of us, but we're in that same ecology. Please look at that set of pictures there. That's a really interesting set of pictures. I'm not sure. Okay, so there you can see the difference over time of what people eat. And this is for developing countries. You can see over time the consumption is taking on less and less of a collection of foods. So the global south is eating more like the global north. As we move towards that, we began to understand that however much we talk of biodiversity as being valuable for the global south, you tell anybody in a poor country to eat millets, they'll say that's poverty food. What do you want us to do? You want us to be backward? And we encountered this. So we can say, till the cows come home, farting or not, great, eat millets. People are going to go, no. Is there a market? So we looked at countries, unlike India, where millets was consumed, no longer consumed, and tried to understand, can we introduce millets? This got the scientists very excited, our ICRISAT colleagues, because they were like, oh, we have a iron-augmented pearl millet, which will not only be good, but it'll also be, in terms of climate change, because millets don't need water and they withstand higher temperatures, but also anemia will be reduced in mothers that eat this. Nobody asked the mothers whether they wanted to eat it, but they would like our project to do it. We said, okay, if the seeds are there. COVID happened, so we couldn't go further, but we did a study on the results of it. You can see what's happening here, why it's important. The crops that are grown, according to FAO data, are largely root crops. Yam and cassava are root crops. We are talking about projected change in maize because that's interesting. We're talking about a part of the world that eats something different to what they're growing. So we were doing this project while we were working with partners like IIT Bombay. We had 2 partners, MRC in Gambia, which is a part of the world, a tiny part of the world, but important. The MRC is the medical research unit of the UK Council, so they have a lab there so we can work there. Because with any of these gene plasms, we can't take them across the world, right? Because that is what the biodiversity pledge is, that you don't move. We had ICRISAT, a partner in India. They could move it to Ethiopia, where there's ICRISAT office. They could move it to their West Sahelian office. So that's how the seeds moved. COVID happened, but we wrote a paper about these millet communities. So we did, you know, the usual dietary index, nutritional value. We asked all on the phone. We knew these communities, but all on the phone in the end because of COVID. We found something interesting. We found that households that produce millets were less likely to have loss of weight because they had it at home and they could cook it. But we also found the ones that ate millet had less biodiversity in their diet. So here's the puzzle. You say 1 crop is good, but it doesn't work for biodiversity. Should we be selling them millets, or should we be talking about food more generally? Again, ICRISAT's doing a great thing in GM, but it's pushing GM as one solution for reducing anemia. And this is my anecdote from the women we spoke to just before COVID. We were supposed to have, I guess the equivalent is a millets mela in the middle of our site in Kangi West. And so everyone was going to make different millet recipes. I became a bit of a millets messiah. I collected lots of recipes. Everyone was going to cook. The women were going to manage it. And the one thing the women said is, we don't care how good this is. If it doesn't taste good, no one's going to eat it. And the scientists went, why? Like, have you ever cooked? So this is what I mean by values, okay? It seems so simple, but it isn't. Because you're thinking medical solution, top-down solution. They're going food, community, you know. So we are suddenly seeing that what we should have thought about before, we suddenly thought in COVID because we all froze and we were able to say something is. But we still get these fabulous papers. They're great. Regenerative agriculture, thinking about change. It's like saying net zero. Great ideas. How do they translate when you've got a wicked problem in designing in a community? So, my final one, try to bring the social and technical together. At the moment, what I'm trying to think about is adaptation is not the down end of mitigation. Think adaptation as a central feature of what human beings do. And I'm going to talk about a current project we're doing in the UK, which is called Changing Landscape for Net Zero. It's supposed to be a whole system approach. You say, great, we've got physicists, we've got computer scientists, we've got chemists, we've got some social scientists, okay? And the idea is the British government gave 40 million, 2 years ago now, to 4 different institutions to do collaborative work for net zero. So the one that Cambridge leads on is called landscape regeneration. What does it mean in reality? Change the land use to have less GHG emission to meet the UK's net zero. So here's an example of we might have a wicked problem we haven't solved. So how could land use do that? We're on 3 sites. Okay. The one that's closest to where I teach and work is called the Fenlands. That's that one. Where basically you have lots of boggy areas which have now been pumped out with water because you want to grow. Wonderful, fertile. 50% of the vegetables grown in England come from this place. But if you expose these areas, they're actually peatlands. So think marshlands, think tropical marshlands, mangrove forests. They bubble up GHGs. The moment you lose less than 10 centimeters, the GHGs come to the top. So you're saying the food is causing GHG emissions. They're telling the farmers, part of our project, would you like to flood your lands? And they're looking at us going, you're mad. Why would we flood our lands? The entire pumping out system is what's creating our food. And we're going, but you see, there's GHGs. And they go, okay, what else do you want us to grow? Here's the question. So the first thing they said, do you know the government pays to pump out the land? Who's going to pay to pump back the land? The water companies are only given one contract to pump out. They don't have a contract to pump in, and it's not the same machine. You can't turn it backwards and make it pump in. It's a different machine. Just think about us in the social sciences. Scientists are going, let's monitor how much GHG emission. If we tell people, like the 1.5 degrees, your GHG is so much, they'll change their behavior. And we're like, no. They'll agree with you, but they're going to want to know what else they can grow. Okay, 2 other sites, which I won't talk about so much. This is the Cairngorms. This is Scotland, where there aren't many people, and in each of these places, a common story is land ownership. Big farmers want to do something different. This is a classic story most of us in South Asia know. Big farmers want to do different things than small farmers. And here it's all either forest, in which you can have deer, or you can have, and then the rich want to do deer hunting and bring their friends. Okay? Here, in the Cairngorms, which is, this is Cumbria, between Wales and England, it's sheep farming. There are very few people, but largely sheep. So 3 different terrains. The government thinks that we can come up with an idea. It's going to work across all 3. We're going to come up with probably 3 different ideas. They're all wicked problems, and we're already having difficulty. The Fens have only got 1% of the wetland left. Everything else is agriculture. You're going to have to reflood quite a large area. Of that, most of the farmers are small, 10 to 100 hectares. They are tenant farmers. They're not rich. We have one very large player with 14,000 hectares. I mean, they don't mind flooding and doing different things. But also, while we're talking about pumping, East Anglia is one of the driest parts of the country. We're running out of water. And they're saying, where's the water going to come? We are creating reservoirs to collect water for people to drink because we're running out of water and we've got sea change. And we're talking about pumping water. So we're not thinking in a connected way. And of course, it's a 3 billion farming economy. We don't have a lot of else happening in these areas. Outside Cambridge, it's all farms. So we started working there, started working with the water company, started talking to people. Eastern England is the driest place. We have a fact. We're talking about pumping in water. We don't have enough reservoirs. We produce a lot of food. We need water. So suddenly, the water companies are saying, you can't have the water for agriculture. We need the water for houses. So we started consulting. We just finished a major survey looking at farmers in the region. The paper that Rekha, my postdoc, used to be at IIT Bombay, so very good students. We surveyed all the householders, all the agricultural holders who wanted to talk about alternative schemes. AES is Agricultural Environment Scheme, which means you're buying into some kind of system. Country stewardship, which could be any of these. Winter bird feed, means you're growing on the side plants that birds can eat. Nectar mist, that means you're doing wild flowers on some part to have bees. Flower-rich margins, buffers, these are the kinds of things people want to do. Then we asked them, why are you doing this? Is it because you think that doing this alternative is going to increase biodiversity? And they were like, yeah, but we're really doing this because it looks beautiful. They're interested in living in nice places. Their value is very different from what the government wants. I don't think we can write a report for the government and says, oh, it's because it's going to be beautiful. We are now working with them to understand how what they value could be linked to what's going to happen. We're halfway through, maybe in 2 years I can tell you the answers. Wicked problems are there across the world. And that's where I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Fennu. It was a nice talk about a problem that can neither be clearly defined nor we have a good technical solution. So right now we can open up the floor for more discussion and more questions. So anyone who wants to start a question, they can raise his hand and we'll go around that.
I think so. Thinking historically.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Saksham. I'm a fourth year undergraduate in economics here. So, thinking historically, what are some wicked problems that we have solved from the bottom-up approach?
Good question. So one wicked problem that we have solved from bottom up, for example, is take Costa Rica. So Costa Rica announced 4 years ago now that they're going to take the idea of biodiversity through their communities. So working with indigenous communities, they thought, what did they prize most importantly? And they created biomes, so biomes across the country in relation to that. And when now people come to do tourism, they are not coming to see, they're coming to work. You can only be part of it if you work with the community and take that knowledge elsewhere. So they're driving it in a very different way. It's a small country, it still has immense biodiversity, but they're not going for a model like somewhere else. What matters to us is our species, and they've now named and actually found species that others did not know exist. So it's actually adding value, it's becoming part of the curriculum at school, at university. It's only 5 years old, but that means another generation of young scientists, they will be the place to lead the research.
Hi, I'm Oshimi. So fascinating talk, Shailaja. I have a question which is, looking at your examples and all that, is it the case that will it be oversimplification if I say that your wicked problems are really wicked because the cost of the policy and the benefits of the policies are not equally distributed, and that's what makes the problem wicked? And therefore, really, it boils down to the age-old distributional issues: who gets the benefit, who gets the, who pays for it. So, can I
think at one level, you might not be wrong that distribution is part of a solution that is necessary for many public policies. But I think the definitional aspect is incredibly important, which is why I gave the example of poverty. There was a poem running around in the 70s, the development set, right? They go around the world solving poverty, getting richer while other people are getting poorer. So when you think about if there's a problem that has to be designed to ameliorate, then you've got to think about how you manage it. And if you've done it for 30 years and hasn't worked, you have to reconsider. And that's fundamentally poverty as a distributional issue. There's an asset issue as well. There's an agency issue as well. And so sometimes we need to retrace. And so the first question was really important. How do we look at the history? And are there examples we've missed out? Because pathology says what hasn't worked. There might be some good examples that are working today. There might be others that we haven't thought about. But clearly, engineering solutions for ecosystems is a bad idea. And that really is not saying engineering is a bad idea, but why would you take a management school approach to the ecosystem? And that's De Vries and Nagendra's point. This is not a system that it can be deployed to. In other places, clearly it can. So when you say distribution, I think value for money might be a better way to say it, of course, and that's what as economists we would say. But I think there is a fundamental design issue. Talking to these people isn't easy. You have to go out. We only had 70 people whose data we could use out of 140 to be cleaned. It's very small. However, having done that, we can now take that survey to the other two sites. We can't play it out. So to answer your question, in the Cairngorms and Cumbria, you have a much more active ecosystem movement than in the Fens, because it's not being used for agriculture. But even there, the crofter, who's a smallholder, is different from this large person. And so what we're doing, which is uncomfortable for any government, is saying we want to look at different sizes. That may not be comfortable, but I think if the distribution issue is not raised at the beginning, it can't be part of the design. And so your question is a good one. I don't think distribution has to come at the end. That's what I would say.
So, what is the role of community in defining the wicked problem rather than bureaucrat, apparatus, or the researcher itself?
Okay, so big question. I think it's oftentimes difficult if you are in a situation where either a livelihood form or a resource or a particular system is failing. So Chambers would make the argument, if you ask people for claims, everyone is going to say, I want more. It's a basic human dimension. What you're asking people is, in what you're doing, what is the binding constraint? So you're not saying, I have a large pot of money, tell me what you want. You're saying, what is the binding constraint in what you're doing? Now, obviously, if you're asking this, say, let's take the case of agriculture. If I'm asking a farmer, what more do you want to grow? They're going to say, you know, I've only got so much land, so there's a crop choice issue. So in the millets case, if you're going to move to all millets, you've got an issue of the supply chain may not be adequately formulated for you to get returns. So in terms of, oh, do you want a minimum support price for millets? Well, hang on. It's not do you want it or not. Will it improve the supply chain? Right? Because the reason you had a minimum support price for rice and wheat is because they had to be fed to people at a time where we had food poverty. We certainly have food poverty, but we also have 50% of people who eat well, even in rural areas. So you think about, why do you need this? Where is millets going into the supply chain? And so we need new tools and new economic pricing to deal with some of those issues. Because what happens, so here's the case of Gambia, which is the one I said where, you know, we did the work. The poor have moved from growing millets to rice. They'll grow millets if there's a supply chain outside. And there's now a West African fonio supply chain because Pierre TM, who's this very well-known chef in New York, uses only stuff sourced from there for his stuff in his kitchen. However, they want to eat rice because they believe it's superior. So that's the point. Maybe the angle is, are your children getting obese? Rather than the anemia issue. Because you say, oh, you need anemia. You can't see that. If you enter with, is there a problem in the children, and then talk of anemia, your entry point is different. But often medical professionals, just like economists or engineers, see the problem the way they formulated it. So the role of the community is not to drive the problem. They have challenges. The community needs to be asked what they value. The flip side is, what is the constraint? That means, in our case, 2 years of piloting and surveying before we move into solution. You know what our scientist colleagues say? Can't we move faster? And we're like, you can collect more GHG data, give it back to us, we can put it back into the discussion. Maybe if we have 3 years GHG data, they'll answer it. But we don't think. Biodiversity data is really interesting. More butterflies when you do those kinds of policies. Is that enough? How many butterflies will it take before someone thinks a different story? So we need more information. So evidence-based information, hugely important. Evidence-based Control trials, really important. And then you start asking communities, has it been beneficial? So the thing everybody likes is beekeeping, because it's a calm activity. You can again see what they're saying. Value, calm place, ecotourism coming in. They're thinking of different livelihoods, but it may not be a crop choice one. And we're seeing it as a crop choice problem. So we're wrong.
Hello, good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
So my question is like, if we find that tamed solutions are sometimes like not successful in like dealing with wicked solutions. So, and we can see that there's a conflict between tamed and wicked solutions. So doesn't it take us to a state of policy paralysis as the ultimate outcome? If we look at it as a prisoner's dilemma problem, like if there's a conflict between tamed solution and wicked solutions, so at the end we are actually moving towards policy paralysis.
Interesting point. I think I would say the policy paralysis will only be in the group called economists. I think it's because we think in this way. It's really about reconsidering. And I'm not saying we got it wrong. There are lots of places where a tame solution is grand. Don't get me wrong. It's just in the areas that we are engaging with increasingly, we haven't found, and I don't think there is. Once you reconceptualize the problem, there may be elements in it where you can do tame solutions. So for example, if you look at the budget for a national health system and you think, I want to reduce waiting times, you can think about reducing waiting times by bringing in someone else on a Saturday. That would reduce waiting times. But it won't solve the problem of the NHS is not functional. You can certainly have tame solutions to remedy some of the immediate challenges, but you need to reconsider what's fit for purpose.
Okay, Dr. Fennel, yeah, Professor Fennel, this will be the last question. Okay. Throughout your discussion, there is one thing that has been coming up, but you have not mentioned, is the institutional problem that is there. Now, if you are bringing the institutional problem in this wicked problem, what you are trying to say is that the local institutions, all local institutions will have a different solution of its own. Now, if we go by that, then how many multiple solutions we can accommodate in the policy framework? Isn't it a costly thing itself to think about a solution out of the wicked problem? In that case, isn't it good to have an economic way to have a so-called first-base solution imposed on it and avoid this multiplicity of policy, which cannot be at some time there is a ultimate constraint how much you can multiply a short property.
So I would agree that in the early decades of development, everyone went for first best solution or second best solution. If government is second best because first best is the market, most people were using the government to grow the market. It worked, and in most parts of the world by the 1970s, some of the problems of that arose. So historically, clearly, we're not going back to recreate the wheel, but I think going forward, it's not an issue of every local government's going to have a different solution. You're going to say, here's the budget. So I'm going to give you an example from Indonesia. So many islands, each has a local administration, they move forward, some are more effective than others. But they're given a budget, and that budget is managed by them. There's, of course, issues between the federal and the local, how you get the money. And you have to use that money to manage your community. So different communities manage them differently because they have different ethnic mixes, they have different needs. But at the end of the day, what they have to show in the metric is, did education improve? Did health improve? The only thing that you do for next year is show an outcome. So your solution can be different, your outcome has to be the same. You're not creating different models.
Okay.
I think Partha's hand was up.
The last two questions confused me, so first is clarification, which is A, because someone either misspoke or there are no wicked solutions.
No wicked problems, no solutions.
A, and B, there is in some sense, I think, a thing that there is perhaps a confounding of wickedness and multiplicity. And it's not really that multiplicity is necessarily wicked. It just simply means that there is, you have to define a space over which some stuff is happening, right? But what I'm trying to say, especially, and that's true in all your three examples, is I'm looking at how hysteresis plays into something like this, right? So when you're trying to choose a crop, when you're trying to choose something else, whether it's water, what you do today matters for what you can do tomorrow. And that's immensely true for, of course, carbon, because you are essentially, by what you, if the theory is right, by what you're doing today, you're doing tomorrow. And I am trying to understand to what extent this presence or absence of hysteresis, this element of irreversibility, plays into the wickedness, extent of wickedness of a given problem.
Great question. So if we think about the biodiversity case and the Dasgupta review, that was one of the challenges, I think, in putting it together to say, are we ever going to get away from a position where just when we get to the point where something is severely endangered, we see the value of it? And that is a cost. And the solution to that then would be genetic material being preserved as a way to prevent that. And so again, you can price that and say those who have the material in the global south would get the ability to manage it, which is why the Costa Rica example is an interesting one to me. But I think fundamentally what you're saying is absolutely correct. Not only it is the hysteresis effect, it's a combination of that with the reduced time discounting that happens. And so you're absolutely right. Multiplicity is not the problem in itself if we don't think about it in terms of interdependencies and hysteresis. Absolutely. And that's the kind of modeling you can think about in theory, and then you can try and unpick it. I think the problem, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but systems theory, which engineers do, is really interesting, but it doesn't have things like hysteresis in it. So it's still an engineering solution, and what I'm asking for is feedback loops more akin to economic feedbacks. I don't know if I answered your question, Partha.
Thank you, everyone. And I would invite Professor Narayanan to present a small memento to Professor Fennell.
Thank you. Didn't expect that.
So thank you, everyone. So right now, we are going to proceed to the Gulmohar third floor for the welcome dinner. So everyone is welcome. Please join us in the Gulmohar and we can have interact. And in that time, if you want to ask a lot of questions to Professor Fennell, please come and ask me.
Of course, no problem at all.
Good.
And if you